Hello, and welcome to the Survivor Reborn podcast series. I'm your host, Jenni Milward. Today, I'm joined by Chris from the Survivor Reborn team.
Hello.
And our very special guest is none other than Murti Schofield, the writer and creative mind behind Lara's darkest and most infamous adventure, The Angel of Darkness. Hello, Murti.
Hi there. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Murti. Hey, Jenni.
Today, we're going to be talking a bit about the background and the influences behind The Angel of Darkness. So, Murti, could you tell us a little bit about where you came from when you first entered the Tomb Raider universe? Because The Angel of Darkness really is unique in terms of its story and its tone.
Definitely unique. Definitely.
Mm-hmm. It's so much darker and more mature. Went off in a far more complicated direction than any Tomb Raider before or since. So what was sort of your mental influences? What inspired you to go in this direction?
Well, very briefly, I'd worked in media as a design artist in television and some film projects that didn't come off. I'd also worked as an animator. But my personal interests were archaeology, ancient myth, anything that was multi-layered. So I actually grew up very strongly influenced by comics of the era that I grew up in, the 1950s and 60s, adventure stories, King Solomon's Mines illustrated on the back of the topper, great classic adventure, the H.G. Wells stories, all the classic stories and myths, but mostly illustration. I came from a very visual background, and to feed that visual hunger that I had, I did a lot of traveling. Just previous to getting involved with CORE, I'd spent quite a few years going out to Turkey. I'd been out to India. I'd been around Spain, various places, but always looking for ancient sites. I seemed very strongly drawn to anything that was subterranean or hidden. I really did believe that what we see on the surface.
Places.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes. So I was very interested in ancient civilizations, ancient languages, ancient locations, but particularly anything that was underground and hidden. It seems strange to say that, but these things are hidden in plain sight because people know where these cave systems are and so on, but they're still inaccessible to most people. And I had a lot of film influences, a lot of comic book influences, but primarily very visual. And the writers I was interested and influenced by, I loved Joss Whedon, all the early stuff, particularly Serenity and Aaron Sorkin for his work on West Wing. So I loved sharp, crisp dialogue. People who didn't faff around with overlong explanations about things. You just trust that the audience is with you, get in there and start the adventure rocking and rolling. And then I was drawn to very dark stuff as well, like, of course, Sherlock Holmes. All the dark stuff, the ancient dark stuff.
I can tell there's quite the Lovecraftian influence for Angel of Darkness.
Very,
as well.
very Lovecraft. My favourite all-time story of Lovecraft was the Strange Case of Charles Dexter Ward. I adored that. I loved all the other stuff, but that was my favourite. I read and reread that. I used to take that on holiday as my comfort book. That shows how dark things were. I'd go to Spain and take, Charles Dexter Ward.
It's just what you want, isn't it? To cuddle up to is all these ancient monsters and mysteries. No, that as Chris says, that flavour, that dark gothic horror vibe was always very, very strong in The Angel of Darkness, particularly when we get down to the sort of raising the Nephilim and Eckhart's background.
Yes, definitely.
You definitely seem to prefer the darker, grittier sort of biblical influences rather than the nice shiny stuff. But that is what gave it such a great background and a great
Well,
tone.
when I was traveling in Turkey, I used to get off I'd go along with the tourist routes, and then I'd get off the Turkish routes, because I'd learned enough Turkish at the time to be able to explain the sort of things I wanted, and look after myself, order food, and so on. So I got taken into people's homes, and then I could ask where these sites were. They weren't hidden particularly, but there was one chap who took me to an abandoned town, an abandoned village, and he was walking me through the village. There was nobody else around. He said, "Oh, people just don't come here." And he was showing me on the walls of this ruin, there were sort of patterns on the walls. And he said, "My mother used to come here and buy herbs from the apothecary who lived here, and that was where the herbs were stored." That kind of stuff. I mean, that's just pure gold.
Absolutely.
Wow.
You can't make that up. And then there was a fountain that was bubbling out. And for me, it was just, this is where the spirits must reside and where people must communicate with things. So I was actually doing this stuff instead of just simply reading about it. So it was really saturated in me.
It's an adventure in itself.
Yes. So when I was asked, because when I first went for the interview at Core, I thought I was going to be asked to do some dialogue. I'd done some dialogue for Fighting Force 2, and I'd been asked.
I was going to say it was a new thing for you, wasn't it?
Yes, and I'd been asked to go back for another interview, and what they asked me was, we're looking to do something new with Tomb Raider. Do you have any ideas? And of course, I was absolutely saturated in this stuff, and I said, "Do I have any ideas?" Well, so I just made the stuff up on the spot, and they wanted a spin-off character, and I had a character in my mind for a project of my own. I thought, well, I can adapt him a little bit and change him. So he wasn't called Curtis at the time, but he became to be called Curtis. So I was just brim full of ideas that were sloshing around, and I was working, and I thought a lot of these I can adapt and use for what I understood as the Tomb Raider. I mean, I knew the games. And I knew there were, the ancient, the archaeological stuff, and the Tomb Raider stuff, and Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff. Oh, fantastic,
Because that was actually a question I was thinking of asking you, Murti, is what was your perception of the Tomb Raider universe before you physically got involved and employed in sort of core design?
Well, I was working at a company called Signosis in Chester at the time it came out, and everybody was just raving about this game. And I'm not a big games player. I'm very interested in the dynamics of games and the opportunity. For me, games, it's an open space to be creative in my own way. But I was an environment builder then, and they were all talking about Tomb Raider and how novel it was and how new it was. So what I would do, I would sit behind people as they were playing it in the studio. And watching all that, I thought, oh, this is really intriguing, the idea of all this ancient world. And immediately I was thinking, but they could do more with this. They could do more filmic stuff. And of course, the limitations of the game meant that you couldn't do more filmic stuff. Everything had to be tied to the gameplay structure. But it did fascinate me. And I realized that Lara was a very enigmatic character. Well, she seemed to me to be an enigmatic character. I don't know how many people got to asking themselves questions about her motivations at that stage, but I was thinking, well, where would she come from? Why would she do this? And of course, all that history came out later on. So, yeah.
Yeah, because when you were brought on to do the sort of the background and the story to Angel of Darkness, obviously, you would have had to have taken into account what came before.
Yes.
Particularly the last revelation and the sort of events of Chronicles.
Yes.
With her relationship to Von Croy, her missing presumed dead in Egypt. All of these would have had a really strong impact on certainly how the Angel of Darkness was set up and started. So what sort of things did you take away from what came before into blending it with your own ideas?
I certainly didn't want to reject anything. What I wanted to do was build on what was there. And I asked if there were any folders and files of previous games. And I found that there were archive files, ring binder folders, full of the information, the background information, rejected ideas, and so on. So I was able to take those away and just completely immerse myself in those. A lot of the stuff I didn't feel I could use, but it didn't mean I was rejecting them. I just wasn't able to use them in the storyline that was becoming clear for me. But what I did was use as many links as possible to that. So this wasn't Lara suddenly. This wasn't Lara renewed and a new version of Lara. This was a developed Lara, as I saw it, a sort of more mature. But yes, definitely. I was actually told at the time, well, it was asked that, we would like to go into a slightly more realistic, darker world. And I thought, right, well, I can give you that.
Yeah, because that is very much the tonal shift, I think, that took place between the previous games and then Angel of Darkness, because we had certainly in the first 3 games this very Saturday matinee feel of, like Indiana Jones, like Flash Gordon, where it was a serialized adventure. She came, she wanted, she got it, she rides off into the sunset. But with The Last Revelation, we ended it with her, we think that she may have been killed by and buried underneath the pyramid. So suddenly the whole journey that Lara is undertaking takes a much darker, more sort of existentially questioning shift. And then when we see her again at the beginning of Angel of Darkness, we have no real explanation to bridge the gap, but we instantly know that the story is darker, that Lara herself has changed for the darker. And you really didn't shy away from the dark psychology of that and making her reflect all that damage that she'd undertaken.
I think that worked perfectly as well. I really do.
No, what appealed to me was the classic elements of Lara. Going into the dark side, it was very easy, because I thought, the perfect thing that you need for a hero is for them to die or to appear to die. Once they've died or appeared to die, this is the Campbell classic hero thing that was used as a blueprint for Star Wars. You have your hero die, and in a sort of Hollywood sense, and then they get reborn and they've changed, they've transmuted. And I thought, well, this is perfect. This is great that I've come in at this point, because this is where Lara does this. She has, if she hasn't died, she's gone through some very, very rigorous restructuring, spiritually and emotionally and mentally as well. So how will she emerge from this? And so, as I could see it, she'd be extremely damaged, particularly in a relationship to her mentor. How would she feel about that? This is the area I wanted to dig into immediately. And the people I was saying this to, they said, oh yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. Okay, what can you give us? So the next weeks and months, I was trying to get something that held together, but also they'd said, we want something that's going to have the possibility of playing for 3 games. So I thought, right, I need a really, really big tapestry for this, a huge story tapestry. And the first one has got to establish an awful lot of material. But I have to say, the key to all of this, the key to every single part of this, was the Nephilim.
Yes.
When I was in Turkey, I came across a place called the Yedi Uyuyunlar, which is a cave called the Cave of the Seven Sleepers, and these were thought to be angels or angelic type beings who would come back to, rather like the King Arthur myth. They would come back when humanity needed them. In the myth that was established for that cave system, they weren't Nephilim. But this story of the 7 sleepers, I thought, oh wow, Arthurian legend and various other ones. This is brilliant. And I'd known about the Nephilim, and I thought, well, what if that was the Nephilim? What if that cave system was a secret? And wow. Then and then it began to grow from there. And then I began to discover. I'd already discovered the hidden cities in Cappadocia. And I thought, how about if we transfer that to Cappadocia? You've got series of underground. You've not got one underground city. You've got a series of. I mean, it's incredible. I hate the cliche phrase, you couldn't make it up, but you really couldn't. This stuff exists. And what I wanted to do was tie it into stuff that people could go out there and check and see and visit if they wanted to.
That's so good. I love it. It's like it's all these different places and all these different ideas, and just because they're all out there, they needed a game like this. They needed a writer like you to just put those elements together. and it works.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, because that was my. I really wanted to give it something that I wasn't trying to give it something that hadn't been there before. I just wanted to give it something that would be satisfying to me in my urge to get multi-layered things that I come across, and you come across the mention of a name, and you think, oh, now is that a made-up name? Has the writer just made that name? And you go and look online, and you think, oh wow, this character existed, and all that, and it can take you into all sorts of directions. Unfortunately, in the recent years, subsequent to the whole Angel of Darkness fiasco and falling apart and everything else, a lot of fans have made it clear to me that they love that part of it, that they can go out and check these things, and it does have a relationship to the real world. And that to me is real archaeology. That's not fantasy. That's archaeology.
No, that was a very strong theme running all the way through the Angel of Darkness, and that you would ground your fantastical story in real world locations like Paris and Prague. You'd be able to actually go to the Louvre. You'd actually be able to walk around the galleries, and you'd see that door or that passageway and think, I wonder what's behind there. Because in the game, there's an archaeological dig. It's almost like an onion sort of approach to storytelling, Murti, because you started off with that,
and we never touched a fraction of what was below Paris. Well, exactly. I mean, Paris is just honeycombed with stuff. We never got to that. I was wanting to get to that. We never got to that.
I was going to say, was the catacombs of Paris, a big inspiration behind setting it there and going into like Brother Obscura's tomb and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was just I was discovering these places, and it seemed to. I don't want this to sound too airy-fairy, but when I came across something like that, it was almost like there were characters and stories just waiting, like, tell our story. When I heard about the ossuaries in Prague, these chapels made of bones and entire chapels and ceilings structured. My goodness, the number of the number of skeletons that must imagine the number of stories behind the people that were part of the chapel. It's just.
It is. It's crazy to think, isn't it? I mean, I remember the first time I saw pictures of that place, and I'd still love to visit it someday. And it's like, oh wow, yeah, look at all that amazing design work of all these skeletons, and then you start thinking, oh, but they
are actually skeletons.
And they were real, and now they're part of a ceiling. These
structures, these bones, are actually, walking around. They were people with lives, and all sorts of amazing coincidences happened. I mean, one of the things I mentioned Curtis, obviously, before, very, very briefly, but I mean, I didn't choose the name Curtis. I had a number of names I wanted to give the character, but the team decided on Curtis Trent. And I thought, well, of course, that's fine. Everybody's making the contribution. And then I thought, Curtis Trent, KT, Knights Templar, perfect. Right, we go with that.
Wow.
I just thought, I've got to go with that. That's too good. No, if they've come up with KT, I'll go with KT. That's perfect. Because I was.
That's quite the little revelation. I like that.
Because I wanted to call him Vance Renner or Beau Deckard or Guillem. All sorts of different things. I even had a name for him, Chickawa, which is an American Indian name.
I was going to say that sounds Navajo or something.
Yeah, that's bearer of weapons. Because when I decided he had an American Native Indian mother, I thought, well, yeah, he's got to have some Indian name. So Chickawa was bearer of weapons. But this stuff. It was almost like I had this encyclopedia just falling out of my head onto the page, and I was trying to meld this into something that would make a coherent story. And there was never any shortage of material or ideas. And as you know, Jen and Chris, a while back, I came across about 30 pages of rough notes, which I'd been scribbling all sorts of ideas. I mean, this is just real brainstorm stuff with all sorts of things from the past and history. and then I would have to weave that. And I think that's that some of those pages went on Ash's Tomb of Ash, didn't they? They were,
yes,
and they can be looked at there.
Yes.
Yeah, they're really fascinating.
Yeah, we'll definitely have the links to all of this material in the description of this podcast, because I mean, Tomb of Ash and Survivor Reborn frequently have collaborated and supported each other.
Of
so
course.
we know that you've deposited quite a lot of material over there over the last few years and so on. And I would urge any fan, no matter where you are or what your interest is in, if you love stories, just go and have a dig through this material, because it is a treasure trove of creativity and inspiration. Really, even if you don't like Angel of Darkness, you'll love the sheer energy that was put into this material. It's just insane, the amount of work you put into this.
I was looking at some of this stuff a few weeks back, because I think I've given Ash 15 pages or something like that, 10 or 15 pages. There's 30 odd pages of this, and I was looking at it and I thought it's probably the best exterior representation of what my head's like. I've got to, people can look at this and say, oh, the stories, oh, it's so-so, it's okay. But I've got to live with this stuff. This is what's going on inside my head all the time.
You're being tormented by all these creative demons. No,
literally. It gets close to feeling like that sometimes, but the peace comes by putting it down and then getting it to work and getting it to become coherent. And I know people have been very critical of the story of Angel of Darkness and say, well, it's not complete, it's rambling. And of course, the explanation for that, as everybody who's looked into this knows, a lot of the things were cut out and things were curtailed, and Curtis's abilities were curtailed. So he became just a puppet, walking around. He's still got a good following, but what he could have been and what the story could have been. But of course, it's a game. It's a game, and the game has to work. The story has to work with game structure. On the other hand, the gaming structure has to serve the story. I had a great quote from somebody, I forget who it was, but it said, if the game isn't serving the story, the game isn't going to work.
No, very much so.
I was going to say, sticking with the theme of Curtis, of course, Core Design said that they wanted to expand the Tomb Raider franchise and maybe even have like a Curtis Trent spin-off.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more about that as well?
Yes, I had ideas for Curtis. I mean, I had enough material worked out in note form, at least, for the second and third possible games. We never got to that, but I had other characters. And I had I worked out a lot of background for Curtis. It's like you see the tip of the iceberg in the game, on the part of the story that you come across. But there was a whole. There were pages and pages of background. His, how he got, where he was born, how he was being chased. The Lux Veritatis were being chased by the Cabal, where Curtis was born in America. All this, loads and loads of this material. But there were other characters as well. One of them being Morgau Vasily, a female character, who I really adored and would have loved to see that, because she would have been such a great villain. Stroke dying person, stroke becomes an ally. The whole transformation thing, the whole Campbell thing again, this transformation of the hero. There were so many things with Curtis I would have loved to have seen and loved to have done. I would have loved to have seen him in the first game just doing half of the things we planned that he could have done. It would have made him such a better character. But I do know that people who responded to the sort of amorous push me pull you pulling pigtails relationship between Lara and Curtis, and I know some people responded to that and thought that was great, and they ran with that, and they've written their own stories, and Curtis and Lara get it off, and sure, that's fine, okay, that's on a parallel. People should write their own ideas. But what was interesting to me was the things that Curtis and Lara could have done simply as allies, not as a romantic interest. Surely they are attracted to each other, both very powerful individuals. But I didn't see it necessarily as a romance thing. It would be one of those things of, I can shoot faster than you, I can fight harder than you. It would be an endless competition, and I think there'd be great drama and story possibility in that, rather than if they did become a romance, then it's like, oh, okay. It's like,
you've touched upon something that is, you know, an ongoing sore point in the Tomb Raider community is this sort of romanticization, literally, of Lara as a character. Because one of the things that was really refreshing about the relationship that you created between Lara and Curtis, this, as you say, this push me, pulling your pigtails, endless competition, and the idea that they respect each other as allies rather than fall into just the trap of falling into a romantic relationship. That was really refreshing and really more in keeping with Lara's character as she was established in the prior games. She was a loner, and Curtis
Definitely.
was also a loner. They were both super independent, and you managed to. Yeah.
I think it would have gone completely against the grain if they'd written it as they like each other and they sort of now they're together, and no, that's not how she would have gone. As you said, it's the competitiveness of both of them trying to show off against each other, but also having fun whilst doing it as allies.
Yeah, and the thing that creates great drama is not complacency and happiness, I'm afraid. You know,
not with storytelling.
It really isn't. You know, I mean, for me, the thing that makes any character interesting, apart from the name and the past, the motivations and their appearance, is the willingness or otherwise to commit to violence or at least embrace mayhem. If they're going to be prepared to deal with the violence and the mayhem that's out in the world and the murder that's going on, or you know, even either go with it or combat it. So you get a great villain who actually embraces it and says, yes, I will be a violent person. And you get the great hero or heroine who say, no, I will combat the violence. There's your drama, there's your story, there's your power behind motivation and action. And you won't get people driving across the desert, you know, chasing gods if they want to sit at home with a bottle of wine and a massage.
Very much so. Oh, there are times I'm sure that Lara would wish for that, but
I'm sure she does it.
I definitely get this. Yeah. One of Winston's many talents is massaging the feet of extremely weary Tomb Raiders.
And another theme of that I wanted to explore, if given the possibility, and it never came and probably never will, was the fact of not only what were the experiences that Curtis and Lara came from, but what was the lineage, what was the life story, the story of where did they come from? What was the bloodline that produced them?
I'm so glad you're talking about this, because this is something I really wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
I recently reread the interview that you gave for the Tomb Raider 20 years
book, yes.
And the notes in there suggesting the lineage and the bloodline of Curtis and Lara came from the experiments to rebreed Nephilim. And from those communities, they spread out and they bred with normal people, and maybe further down the line, certain people, maybe they're stronger, maybe they're faster, maybe all of these sorts of things. And it's fascinating, and it's so, I adore things like this, and I think it fits Lara so well because she is such it fits so many of her traits. It really does.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would never actually ever, being a person who likes subtlety and nuance and multi-layer, I would never actually say that was the case. But I would put a hell of a lot of signposts in the way saying it probably was. You know, pay attention to this because this probably was the background, and it probably was. If it wasn't this, it was something damn close to it. There must have been a specific bloodline that came from somewhere, and there was. I can't quite remember the name of it now. There was Philip Jose Farmer did a whole range of this where he created a commonality, a common originality for a lot of the fictional heroes. And it was fantastic the way he tied them all in. And I thought, I love that. You go back behind, what is it that makes a great, not just a person who is a hero in terms of the person and character, but physically, if they're enhanced in some way, where has that come from? And that thing about the breeding programs that you were just mentioning, Chris, that seemed the perfect way of doing it and tying it into this massive, great mythos that I was creating. And the lovely thing of recent years is in talking to yourself and talking to Jenni and talking to Ash and other people, I've been able to expand on this a bit more. And actually, I've done quite a bit more work on it, and I've put it back into the archives that Ash has got. So, that was the way my thinking was going. And if that had been possible, I mean, it wasn't up to me to take Lara and turn her into my creature, but I could certainly show the way that she could have expanded and become something really quite profound, I think, rather than, as you say, just a Saturday afternoon heroine who falls off a cliff and, what'll happen next week.
That was something that was very characteristic of the Angel of Darkness, though, even though we can take into account the fact that it was unfinished and there were lots of ideas that would only come to fruition in parts 2 and 3, which sadly never got mentioned. You left an awful lot of breadcrumbs, and you were very good at leading people down the garden path, but not explicitly telling people what was going on. You showed them a nice, interesting garden path and then said, you can walk down it yourself if you want, but I'm not going to spell it out for you. And that is a big legacy of Angel of Darkness, the unfinished business and the unanswered questions. It's really spurred fan creativity and speculation, maybe more by accident than design, but the two seem to have created or added to the Angel of Darkness's sort of mythos almost.
It's kind of quite meta in a way that the game deals with such a similar subject of hidden, forgotten histories, and yeah, that's kind of a lot to do with this game physically, is its actual history of the amount of things that got left out and cut and everything. It's its own shadow history, if you'll pardon the drop.
Yeah. Just to get a plug in the shadow histories. Yeah. But I mean, I mentioned that thing about KT, Curtis Trent and the Knights Templar. I mean, what that was interesting as well. The two cornerstones for the archaeology. For the mythic archaeology of Angel of Darkness for me were the Nephilim and the Knights Templar. But what I didn't want to do was to use the name Knights Templar, because everybody knows a certain amount about Knights Templar. And the moment you say Knights Templar, they come up with an approximate understanding. Oh, I know about the Knights Templar. They did this, this, and this. And I thought, well, yes, you do. But if there was a secret order within this secret order, Knights Templar, you've got to listen to what I've got to say, because I've got some interesting and unusual things to say about that. And I did some research about the Albigensians and Montsegur in southern France, where the Knight Templar, it was one of the places where the Knights Templar were being suppressed. The whole thing, I mean, there's all that history. So I was pointing in that direction. If people say, the Lux Veritatis, they sound a bit like the Knights Templar. Let's go and have a look at the Knights Templar and see if the Lux Veritatis are actually anything like that. Great. Immediately, they're going to discover the Knights Templar. It just opens that door onto a whole world of mystery and let's use the word magic carefully. Archaeological magic, fictional narrative magic. And that's what it's about. I wanted to get people as excited about the ideas that I could put together as I had been by War of the Worlds and the case of Charles Dexter Ward and the Sherlock Holmes stories. I inhabited those places on the page. They came alive for me. And I thought, well, at least I've got, we're going to have some visuals for this. People won't have to imagine everything in Angel of Dark. There will be figures running around doing the puppet work for me. But the story behind it, I think, is even richer than that. And if it gets people doing this is the important thing, if it gets people doing their own stories, I don't care that people put Curtis and Lara together. That's great. Why shouldn't that happen? It's not what I'd do. And there's other people who've done various things, and it's not what I'd do, but it's great that they're doing it, and it gives them ownership of the idea as well, and it brings out their creativity.
Because that's another characteristic that I have noticed with your writing, Murti, is that you're incredibly unselfish about them. They're ideas almost like separate entities. You don't feel any kind of sense of mastery or ownership of them. You're not sort of being super protective and fencing them in. You're more like, okay, ideas, go out into the world and inspire others. go on, that's it, good. And you seem to take a great delight in that sort of seeing them go off and kindle flames in other people's imaginations and create more and more of this universe that you sort of started and now are just seeing expand in all directions.
Yeah, I love it. I love the fact that people get fired up enough by, I mean, people asking questions like, well, what didn't we know about Curtis? When somebody says that, I know they're engaged. I really know they're engaged, because there's so much more I wanted to say about Curtis. But, sometimes I'm tempted to say, well, what would you like to see Curtis do? Go write your own story, go and do it, take it and run with it. And steal the ideas, use the ideas, weave them together. And I want to give an acknowledgement at this point, Jenny, to your your novelization of Angel of Darkness, which is a great piece of work, beautiful writing, great ideas. Again, in there, you've done some things that I wouldn't have done, and the better, I had even better ideas, of course, but no, but I mean, you've done this fantastic piece of work. And now you've done the audio versions of it as well, which people ought to listen to. My goodness, you've got the characters coming alive there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean,
I was gonna say I've read some of what's to come, and wow.
You can't see it, guys,
wow.
but I'm like grinning like I've swallowed a banana sideways, sort of thing. Thank you. That's incredibly kind of you to say. But it comes back to what I said earlier, in that because there were unanswered questions, because there were so many layers to the story and the characters, we didn't know even that Curtis Trent was called Curtis Trent, because he never says his last name.
No.
And he's never referred to it in the game. No. So there were so many things obvious, but out of the way. And that got me fired up to try and fill in the gaps and try and whether you meant them because you layered the story to be, this deep, or whether the gaps had been left out because material had been cut, or that a deadline had been reached, and all that had been meant to go in the sequels, which sadly we never got. Either way, there were so many openings for the imagination, and it fired me up so much that, as you say, I went and novelised it and then did an audiobook version of it. So I must have really gone crazy on it. But other people as well throughout the fandom for now 15 years have been absolutely entranced by the Angel of Darkness, far more than any of the other games by themselves. If you were to sort of do a search for fan-made content and rank it by game, I think you would probably find a very strong correlation that Angel of Darkness gets the most sort of fan speculation and improvisation.
I don't think any other game in the series has had quite as much fan research into it as well.
There's been whole forum threads that have literally gone on for years with people finding and sharing hidden content, or trying to unravel the mysteries.
I remember there was something, I think, a few years ago where somebody managed to extract a load of files from the CD or something that I think it showed Curtis's cut animations.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I remember seeing that, and that was really cool as well. It's another lost piece of history that people just go wild for.
Yeah. I mean, on a similar level, there are plenty. When I was doing the audiobook version, and I had a bunch of files from the game, and actually there were hidden sound files that were never used. We had guards talking. We literally had like a Strauhoff guard, asking, where's my coffee and who put this on my goddamn seat and other things.
Oh, and that they had those translated into Czechoslovakian, French, Spanish. It was amazing hearing that stuff. Yeah.
Because one of the favourite files that I found was actually a clip of, I believe, Eric Loren doing his Curtis sort of death injury noises, which was hilarious because at the end of it, when it all finished, he got a round of applause, and I can actually hear you, Murti, so like encouraging him in the background.
Yeah,
so
I think the comment,
even though it didn't get into the game, you got that little glimpse of the camaraderie that went on.
Yeah.
And you could tell that everybody who was doing that session just had an absolute ball.
Yeah, the comment I made after that recording ended was, well, we're going to have to X-ray quite a bit of this then, Eric, because it was all impact.
That's it.
We can't put that out.
I will tell you this now. Not many people know, because I've worked with Jenni so many times in the past, and Jenni's been graceful enough to do a lot of voice work for my animations. I have somewhere saved on my computer about 2 minutes worth of Jenni making various Lara death notes.
Oh god!
And there's lots of noises, and it's hilarious.
The X-rated files, the versions you weren't allowed to hear.
I promised you that I'd send you the sort of the outtakes from the audiobook, including all the sound special effects that I didn't actually get to share and everything. The worst part of that was making sure that the neighbours didn't come round to report the police. It's one thing when you're doing that in a studio, but when you're doing it, home recording and everything, then you need to kind of be a bit more careful.
Yeah. Well, working with Eric was fantastic, and Joss Ackland, of course. I was once asked what were the things that you were most proud of working on Tomb Raider, and basically all of it. But working with Joss Ackland and working with Eric and Janelle, it was fantastic. Doing the directing the recordings down there, it was a wonderful privilege to be able to do that. I mean, I had done other stuff in the industry before, so I was able to do it. But it really stood out. It was such a fun time. It really was good. And of course, Eric and I are still friends now, and he's helping with something on Shadow Histories and stuff like that. It's very, very good. But yeah, working with Joss as well. And there were outtake files on Joss. I mean, I had him, I'd written some Nephilese for him to say. And he said, how... He said, how do I pronounce this? I said, gutturally, sort of thing, orcish, and he had a go at this stuff, and it was just great. And I didn't know what the translations were. I just wanted him speaking Neph.
I would. Well, I'm not saying give my right arm, but I would probably sacrifice a few fingers to hear that. Because Joss Ackland's voice as Eckhart was probably one of the standout performances of that. I mean,
wasn't it? Brilliant.
He kind of steals the show in whatever he's in, just from the power of his voice. But wow, fantastic!
I was complete fanboy with that, and of course I was directing the stuff, so I had to have this sort of professional approach. And I was saying, oh yeah, that's great, thank you, Josh. Could you just do it a little bit more like this and like this? And after we got to the end, and I had these printouts of Eckhart and Curtis and Lara. And I was thinking, can I possibly ask Joss to sign this? It's so fanboy. And I thought, sod it, I'll kill myself about it. So I said, could you just possibly sign this, please, Joss? Mumble. And he said, oh, of course, dear boy. And so I got him to sign this thing, and I thought, oh, thank goodness I did. I don't care how I came over. It was just so fantastic. Yeah. And I was thinking when you mentioned we were going to do this, Jenni, you were saying, it's 15 years ago. And I thought, no, it's not. It's 18 years ago. Because I was working on this 18 years ago. I was 52 at the time, and I thought, blimey, that's to be coming to do a game at that age. I mean, it's a young person's field, games, and it's one of the reasons why. I think I was the outsider anyway. I was brought in as an outsider, and there was a certain degree of, well, who the hell is this guy? What's he done before? What can he come up with that we haven't? Except that I know that people who'd been working on it before did express their gratitude that I'd come along with a load of ideas at some point. But it was like, a 50-year-old guy coming in and saying, well, we can do this and we can do this. But it got together and it worked in a broken way, but it did. And the thing that it could have been, all that material's there. So, people could run along with it, go along, check on these files, have a look at this stuff. See what it could become. Or do your own stuff. Yeah. Constantly encouraging people to do their own stuff.
Okay, well, that just about wraps it up for this episode. Thanks to Murti for coming and sharing some of his ideas behind The Angel of Darkness, and Chris. And this is bye from me, your host, Jenni Milward, for Survivor Reborn. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please remember to like and subscribe to the Survivor Reborn social media feeds. Happy raiding.